was born, my mum was knocked out for 4 days, leaving my poor dad the job of having to inform family and friends that his new baby had been born with missing limbs. When it finally came time for Mum and Dad to bring me home from the hospital, our elderly neighbours asked them, "When are you putting her into a home?" And when it was time for me to start school, Mum and Dad had to fight the New South Wales Education Department to even get me in for a trial at our local primary mainstream school. A trial I am pleased to say the school and myself passed with flying colours. When I was born, Mum and Dad had a wish for me, and their wish was that I would grow up to be independent and happy. And I believe it was with the support of my parents, most of my teachers, and crucially, the experience of living with a disability that helped me build the character strengths that would enable me to fulfill that wish. Character strengths such as grit, resilience, perseverance, determination, hope, optimism, and empathy. These character strengths, I firmly believe, were integral in my decision as a teenager to swim at the Paralympic Games. I swam at 2 games, Atlanta and Sydney, and I walked away with 3 Paralympic medals. Oh, thank you. I was proud of my achievements. I'm still proud of my achievements. But that experience of being surrounded by these athletes who are so strong and confident, they inspired me, absolutely. I would actually say that they changed my life. I went from being an extremely shy child to being an insanely confident adult, as I'm sure you can tell. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to speak up and speak out loud about my experiences and how I'd built my character strengths so that I could have success. I wanted to tell everyone that I would come across, but most especially children in schools, that they too could build their character strengths and have success, just like me. And then I met Emily. Quite a number of years ago, I was invited to a school in West Yorkshire to speak at a parents' evening. This was a school that had a number of children with physical disabilities, and a number of the parents weren't coping very well. The teachers hoped that if the parents heard my story, perhaps they would have some hope for their children's future. So I told my story as I always did, with passion, drama and excitement, and of course humour sprinkled through. I spoke about my disability, I spoke about all the challenges that I'd faced, and I spoke about my Paralympic journey. And at the end of my talk, I was promptly swamped by all of these parents who wanted to ask me a multitude of questions. And after just a few minutes of answering these questions, I felt a tap on my shoulder. And I turned around. It was the teacher who'd booked me. She said, "Please, will you come and speak to little Emily? She's really, really upset." And I said, "Of course I will." And as I approached Emily, I took this little girl in. She was clutching her mother's hand so tightly. Her face was red, her eyes wet, and her cheeks damp with tears. And as I approached her, she promptly burst into tears again. And I thought, what have I done? That's so awful. I knelt down in front of her and I earnestly asked her, "Please, Emily, tell me what the matter is." But she was crying so hard that she couldn't answer me. So her mother answered for her instead. And this is what Emily's mother said. She said, "Emily had been born with half of her left hand and forearm missing." She said Emily didn't believe in herself. She said Emily didn't think she would ever achieve anything in her life. But after hearing your talk, suddenly she sees a future for herself. This little girl, born so very much like me, stopped me in my tracks. Emily had been bullied at school. She'd been seen for her weaknesses and not her strengths. Life hadn't been great. And this didn't come from a lack of love or care on her parents' or teachers' part. In fact, I think there was an overabundance of love and care there. So much so that Emily's teachers wanted her to experience full inclusion, but they didn't know how to make that happen for Emily. And despite inclusion having come so far since I was in school, there's still this all-pervading sense that we can only do so much for these kids with disabilities. What Emily showed me was what life was like for SEND kids outside of my own experience. Perhaps I'd been more fortunate than others, I wasn't sure. But I did know that what I could give to SEND children was more important than what I could give to anyone else. Because I knew that those character strengths that I'd built up inside of me as a child stemmed so much from my experience of disability. And I wanted to tell this to Emily, and I wanted to tell this to every SEND child I came across. That they had strength in their disability, and that they could grow from this and ultimately flourish. And flourishing is the key word here to my big, gigantic, huge dream. Character education is essentially about flourishing, about finding that meaning and purpose. The Jubilee Centre for Character and Virtue states that character is the moral emotions, motivations, and guiding conducts that we need as individuals and a society to thrive and flourish. And I believe it is our job as part of the education system to point these strengths out to these kids and help them to build them so that they can achieve more than they or we can ever imagine they could achieve. 2 years after that parents' talk, I was invited back to Emily's school to run a workshop on goal setting and aspiration. And as I walked into Emily's classroom, I was gobsmacked. She was a changed child. She had a grin on her face, she looked so confident, and she was fully engaged with her peers. The last activity I did in this workshop was based on a positive psychology intervention called Best Possible Self. I asked the kids to visualise themselves 10 years into the future and to either draw or write this down, to really imagine where they are, who they're with, what they're doing, and perhaps most importantly, what they're feeling. The potential for character education to change lives is huge, and I firmly believe the potential for it to change SEND children's lives is huge. And the thought I want to leave you with in terms of what we can do regarding character education is the increase in research and collaboration between academics, teachers, and SEND children so that we can discover the impact that character education will have on them, so we can help them recognise and acknowledge their strengths and ultimately lead a flourishing life like their peers. At the end of the workshop, Emily came up to me clutching the drawing she'd made. She wanted to show me her best possible self, and this is what she had drawn. There was a Paralympic swimming pool with a bunch of swimmers having a race, and Emily was in lane 4, coming first, of course. And behind the pool was the stands, full of people, an absolute huge crowd cheering her on. And in the middle of the crowd was a circle, and inside that circle stood 4 people, Emily's mother, father, and brother, with big grins on their faces, and standing next to them was me. I turned to Emily, and I'll honestly say with tears in my eyes, and I said to her, "Of course I'll be there cheering you on at the Paralympics, Emily, because I believe in you and I believe in your dream. Thank you."